The doctor said it like he was reading a grocery list. "Miss Harlow, the damage to your left hand is permanent. The tendons in your third and fourth fingers will never fully recover. You will not perform again, not at that level." Sylvie Harlow sat in the paper gown chair, the kind that crinkles every time you breathe, and she did not cry. She had used up her tears 3 weeks ago in the ambulance after the accident. What she felt now was something quieter and far more permanent than grief, the specific kind of emptiness that comes when the thing you built your entire life around is taken from you in a single sentence. She was 26 years old. She had been playing piano since she was 4. She had her first solo performance at Carnegie Hall at 19. Her mother had kept the program in a frame above the fireplace until the day she died. Now a stranger in a white coat was telling her that her hands, her actual hands, were finished. She drove home through the November rain with her left hand wrapped in compression bandages and her right gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. She had an apartment in the city, a small one with good windows, and a digital piano she bought herself with her first real paycheck. She didn't go inside when she got home. She sat in the parking garage for 45 minutes, engine off, listening to the structure settle around her. Her phone rang. It was her father. She let it go to voicemail. He called again and again. She finally answered because she was too tired not to. "Sylvie." His voice had that particular weight to it, the one she'd been afraid of since childhood. Not loud, not angry, just heavy, like something about to fall. "I need you to come home. Dad, I just got out of—" "Your brother's debt," he said, "is not going away, and neither is the man he owes it to." She hadn't known about Tanner's debt. That was the thing that kept circling in her head on the 3-hour drive to her parents' house in Harwick. Not the amount, which was staggering, not the source, which was worse, but the simple fact that her little brother had been drowning for 8 months and no one had told her. She'd been on tour. She'd been recording. She'd been living inside music so completely that the rest of her family had apparently decided not to interrupt. Her father met her at the door. He looked older than she remembered. He looked like a man who had already made a decision he wasn't proud of. "Sit down," he said. "Tell me what's happening." "Sit down, Sylvie." She sat. Her mother hovered near the kitchen doorway, arms crossed over her chest, eyes fixed on the floor. Tanner was not there. Tanner, her father explained, had gone to stay with a friend because he couldn't be in the room for this conversation. That was when Sylvie understood that whatever was about to happen, her family had already agreed to it. They had just been waiting for her to arrive, so they could present it as a discussion. "He owes $400,000, her father said, to a man named Kellner, Aldric Kellner. Even Sylvie knew that name, and she had been living inside concert halls and practice rooms for the better part of a decade. Aldric Kellner ran the most powerful criminal organization on the Eastern Seaboard. He was 41 years old. He had 3 children. His wife had died 2 years ago in a car accident, and the general consensus, spoken in the kind of low, careful voice people use when they're not entirely sure who's listening, was that the accident had not been an accident, and that whoever had arranged it had made a very serious and very final mistake. Aldric Kellner was not a man her brother should have borrowed money from. "There's a proposal," her father said. She looked at him. What kind of proposal? He couldn't meet her eyes. That told her everything before he opened his mouth again. His lawyers reached out. "Kellner is looking for someone to take on a domestic role in his household. His children are." He paused, searched for the word, struggling. He needs someone stable, educated, someone who can. "Dad. It would settle the debt entirely, Dad." Her voice was very quiet. "Are you telling me you're offering me to a crime boss to pay off Tanner's gambling debt?" The silence in the living room was the loudest thing Sylvie had ever heard. Her mother made a small sound in the kitchen doorway, not a protest, something closer to relief, which was somehow worse. It wouldn't be. Her father started. "I want you to think very carefully," Sylvie said, "about what you're asking me." He thought about it. He looked at his hands. He looked at the wall. He looked everywhere except at his daughter, sitting across from him with a broken hand and a career in ruins, and apparently nothing left to be taken. The alternative, he said finally, is that Kellner collects from Tanner directly. Sylvie knew what that meant. She drove back to the city that night. She packed one bag. She made one phone call to her friend Danny to ask her to water the plants and take the piano if it came to that. Then she sat at her kitchen table until 2 in the morning, and she thought about her brother's face when he was 9 years old, when he'd broken a neighbor's window with a baseball and cried for an hour because he was too scared to knock on the door and confess. She thought about how she'd held his hand and walked with him to that door, how she'd stood next to him while he apologized. Some things don't change even when they should. In the morning, she called her father back and told him yes. She met Aldric Kellner's lawyer, a precise, colorless man named Sturt, in the lobby of a building in Midtown Manhattan. Sturt explained the arrangement in the tone of someone reading terms and conditions. She would live at the Kellner residence in Westchester for a period to be determined. She would serve as a household manager and presence for the 3 Kellner children. She would be compensated appropriately. She would not discuss the arrangement with outside parties. She would not attempt to contact law enforcement. She would not leave without notice. "And Mr. Kellner?" Sylvie asked. "You'll meet him at the house," Sturt said. He was already gathering his papers. "He doesn't do meetings. The house was not a house. It was a compound set back from a private road behind a gate that opened before the car even slowed down, because someone was watching from somewhere Sylvie couldn't see. The main building was stone and glass, 3 stories, surrounded by trees that were starting to lose their leaves. There were cameras at every corner. 2 men in dark coats stood near the front entrance trying to look casual and failing entirely. A woman named Greta. The housekeeper, 50s, the kind of capable that radiates off a person like heat, met Sylvie at the door and showed her to her room, which was larger and nicer than her apartment in the city, which felt like an insult. "The children are in the East Wing," Greta said. "Dinner is at 7. Mr. Kellner eats with the children on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Other nights, you'll manage the table. Has there been someone in this role before me?" Greta's expression moved in a way that was not quite a smile. "4 someones in the past 18 months, she said. "The last one lasted 11 days. "What happened after 11 days? She cried. Greta said simply, "And then she left." Sylvie set her bag down on the bed. "What are the children's names?" "Petra. She's 12. "Then the twins, Rafe and Jonah, they're 8. You'll want to keep those 2 in your line of sight at all times. They're not mean, they're just." She paused. "Exploratory and Petra?" Greta looked at the door. "Petra is a different matter entirely. She met the twins first because they came to find her. She was unpacking when the door opened. Without a knock, and 2 identical faces peered in around the frame. 8-year-old twin boys with their father's dark eyes and their late mother's nose, both of them regarding her with the calm scientific interest of researchers encountering a new specimen. "You're smaller than the last one," said the one on the left. "You're Rafe," Sylvie said, because she'd been told the one with the small scar near his chin was Rafe. He blinked. "How did you know?" "Lucky guess." The other one, Jonah, stepped fully into the room. He was holding a small electronic device of some kind. The screen cracked, wires visible where a panel had been removed. "Can you fix a circuit board?" he asked. "Not even slightly," Sylvie said. "But I can teach you how to read a schematic." Jonah looked at the device, then at her, then at the device again, recalibrating. It was the same look she used to get from music students when she'd say something technically unexpected. Surprise trying to become interest before the instinct to resist could catch up. "Maybe," Jonah said, and left. Rafe stayed. He sat on the edge of the bed without being invited and watched her unpack with an expression that was either suspicion or boredom. On an 8-year-old, the 2 looked nearly identical. "My dad doesn't like you," he said. "He doesn't know me. He doesn't like anyone." Sylvie folded a sweater. "How do you know he doesn't like me?" "He made a face," Rafe said, "when Sturt told him your job was music. He said musicians aren't reliable." Sylvie looked at her bandaged hand. "He's not entirely wrong about that," she said. Rafe considered this. "You're weird," he said, and slid off the bed and left. She didn't meet Petra until dinner. The 12-year-old arrived at the table 2 minutes late with the specific deliberateness of someone who has calculated exactly how late she can be without being technically in the wrong. She sat down, arranged her napkin, and regarded Sylvie across the table with the flat, evaluating gaze of a person who has been disappointed by adults enough times to have stopped expecting otherwise. "What are you actually here for?" Petra asked. Not rude, just direct in the way of children who have learned that adults rarely mean what they say. "To help run the house," Sylvie said, "and to be here for you three. The last 4 people said something like that. I know, they all left. I know that too." Petra cut her food with the precise, contained energy of someone performing very deliberate calm. "My dad doesn't want us to get attached to people who leave," she said. "So I don't." Sylvie looked at the girl, 12 years old, already armored like someone twice her age, and felt something move in her chest that she didn't quite have a name for. "That seems exhausting," Sylvie said quietly. Petra looked up, just for a moment, then back down at her plate. Aldric Kellner did not appear for dinner that night. She didn't see him for 3 days. She heard him. Footsteps on the floor above her room at midnight. Low voices in the study with the door closed. The particular hush that settled over the household staff when a certain hallway door opened. She used those 3 days to find her footing. She took the twins to the library and pulled out every electronics manual she could find, and she sat with Jonah on the floor for 2 hours while he talked her through what he was trying to build, which turned out to be a modified radio transmitter, which she carefully did not ask too many questions about. She taught Rafe a card game her grandfather had taught her when she was his age. She did not try to be warm in a way that felt performed. She was just present and consistent, and she showed up at the same time every morning with the same expression, and by the 3rd day the twins had stopped treating her arrival as an event worth noting, which was its own kind of progress. Petra remained at a careful distance, but she was watching. Sylvie could feel it. She met Aldric Kellner on a Thursday morning, when she turned a corner in the east corridor and walked directly into him. He was taller than she expected. She wasn't sure what she had expected. Something harder, maybe. Something that looked more like the stories. But he was just a man in a dark suit with a phone in one hand and a cup of coffee going cold in the other. And he stopped when he saw her with an expression that was not quite surprise and not quite anything she had a word for. "Miss Harlow," he said. His voice was lower than she'd anticipated. Controlled. The way everything about him seemed controlled, like a building designed to withstand pressure from multiple directions. "Mr. Kellner." He looked at her bandaged hand, then at her face, then at the wall behind her which she was learning was his tell. When he wanted to end a conversation before it started, he looked at something that wasn't you. "My children haven't run you off yet," he said. It wasn't a question. "Not yet," she agreed. "They will," he said. "Not unkind. Just certain, the way people are certain about things they've watched happen repeatedly." "Maybe," Sylvie said. He looked back at her then, a brief measuring look. She held it. "Greta says the twins are studying electronics with you," he said. "Jonah has a real talent for it. Rafe's less interested in the theory, but he likes the problem-solving." Something changed very slightly in his face. So slightly she might have imagined it. "My wife was the one who—" He stopped, looked at the wall again. "She encouraged that in them," he said more carefully. "The building things." "I know," Sylvie said. "Jonah told me." He was quiet for a moment. The hallway settled around them. "Don't make promises to my children that you can't keep," he said. "I won't. The last 4. "I know about the last 4, she said. "I'm not them." He looked at her for a long moment, that flat, controlled gaze that she suspected most people found difficult to hold. She held it. She had spent 10 years performing in front of concert halls full of strangers. She knew how to stand still under scrutiny. He nodded once, walked past her down the corridor, did not look back. The first real break came 6 weeks in, and it came from Petra. Sylvie had noticed that Petra disappeared every afternoon between 4 and 5 o'clock. She'd traced the pattern carefully, the way she used to trace a difficult passage in a score, not forcing it, just following where it went. On a Tuesday, she found the girl sitting in a small room at the back of the house that had apparently been a music room at some point. The instruments were covered. The piano bench was pulled out, lid down, and Petra was sitting on it with a notebook open in her lap, pencil moving fast. Sylvie stood in the doorway and didn't say anything. After a moment, Petra said, without looking up, "I come here because it's the only room in the house where no one checks on me. I won't tell anyone. You already knew where I was." "I won't tell anyone," Sylvie said again. Petra looked up. Her eyes went to the covered piano. "Did you ever play that?" "Something like it," Sylvie said. "A long time ago. Greta said you were a concert pianist." "Was," Sylvie said, and held up her bandaged hand. Petra was quiet for a moment. Then, "Does it hurt?" "Sometimes, less than it used to. Do you miss it?" Sylvie looked at the covered piano, the white sheet over it, the outline of the keys faintly visible, like something held in suspension. "Every day," she said. Petra looked at her notebook. "My mum used to play in here," she said. Her voice was very steady, the steadiness of someone who has practiced saying something until they can get through it without breaking. She wasn't professional. She just played when she was stressed. She said the piano didn't judge you. Sylvie sat down on the floor in the doorway, back against the frame. "That's true," she said. "It just receives what you give it." Petra was quiet for a long time after that, but she didn't ask Sylvie to leave. That was the afternoon things changed. Not dramatically. Petra didn't suddenly transform into a different child, and Sylvie would not have trusted that if she had. But she started looking up when Sylvie entered a room. She started leaving small things on the hallway table outside her own door. A book she'd finished, a magazine article she'd torn out. Once a drawing she hadn't technically left for Sylvie, but had left where Sylvie would find it, which was close enough. The twins had already claimed her. That happened the day Jonah's transmitter finally worked, and Rafe picked up the signal on a radio in the kitchen from the 3rd floor, and they both came thundering down the stairs to find her with an urgency that had nothing to do with caution or distance, or the calcified armor of repeated loss, and Rafe grabbed her unwrapped right hand and said, "Did you hear it? Did you hear?" And then caught himself, dropped her hand and stepped back. She didn't make a thing of it, she just said, "I heard it. That was Jonah's design." And Rafe exhaled and said, "Yeah." And the moment passed without either of them having to acknowledge what had moved through it. Aldric Kellner noticed. She didn't realize how closely he watched his own household until she started catching it, the way he'd be present in rooms slightly longer than his business required, the way Greta had mentioned, almost in passing, that he'd asked how the children were doing with the new arrangement. The way, on a Thursday dinner, he sat at the head of the table and listened while Rafe explained, in vivid and technically inaccurate detail, a card game he'd developed based on one Sylvie had taught him, and something moved behind Aldric Kellner's eyes that he quickly locked back down. After dinner he found her in the kitchen, which was where she went when she didn't know what to do with herself. The repetitive task of making tea she'd found was something her hands could still manage. Both of them. He stood in the doorway in the way she'd come to recognize, not entering unless invited, which, for a man who owned everything in a room in every other sense, was a strange habit she'd noticed and not yet understood. Rafe made up a game, he said. He has a good instinct for structure, she said. He likes things to have rules. He didn't used to. He paused before. She didn't say anything. She knew what before meant. She let him have the silence. "The twins haven't asked me for anything in 4 months, he said. They usually ask me for things constantly. I thought it was." He stopped. "I thought something was wrong." "They're asking me," Sylvie said. "I tell them to ask you about things that involve you." He looked at her. "What things?" "Rafe wants to know if you'd teach him to drive on the back property. Not on roads, just on the property. He's been working up to asking." Aldric Kellner was quiet. "He thinks you'll say no," Sylvie added, "but I think he mostly just wants to spend the time." Something moved in his face that he didn't lock down fast enough. She watched it happen. the specific expression of a father who has been very busy being a specific kind of man and has not been paying attention to what his son actually needs, realizing it all at once in a small kitchen on a Thursday night. "I'll ask him," Aldric said. "He'll act like it's no big deal," Sylvie said. "Don't let that fool you." The corner of his mouth moved, just barely. "Are you giving me advice on my own son?" "Yes," she said. The almost smile stayed a moment longer than she expected. The crisis came on a Friday in January. She hadn't seen it coming, which was her fault. She'd been watching the house, the children, the careful negotiation of daily life, and she'd stopped watching what lived around the edges of all of it. She was in the music room with Petra, who had finally, after 2 months, asked Sylvie to uncover the piano. She wasn't playing, her hand was still unreliable, and anyway, that wasn't what this was. She was teaching Petra basic theory, intervals, how to hear the space between notes, and Petra had the focused intensity of a person who discovers a language they didn't know they'd been waiting to learn. Jonah came in at a run. He didn't run. Jonah was 8 years old and deeply deliberate about his movements, the way engineers are deliberate. He did not run. His face was white. "Someone's here," he said. "At the gate. They came through the back. Greta says to find you." She moved fast. She got both boys into the main hallway. She found Petra right behind her already because Petra had apparently understood immediately from Jonah's face, and she put herself between the children and the south corridor, and she said, in the voice she used when she meant it absolutely, "Stay here. Do not move," she heard shouting somewhere in the east wing. Then Aldric's voice, low and controlled, the kind of controlled that was not calm but its opposite. Pressure held in a space that was too small for it. Then a door, then a gunshot. The twins grabbed her arms from behind, both of them, and she held on and didn't move and kept her body in the corridor until 2 of Aldric's men came through the south door and said, it was done, it was handled. She should get the children to the upstairs sitting room and stay there. Petra had not made a sound through any of it. She stood behind Sylvie with her hand in Sylvie's right hand, and she did not make a sound, and when Sylvie finally turned around to look at her, Petra's eyes were dry and very dark and very scared, and Sylvie pulled her in without asking and held on. "We're okay," Sylvie said. "We're okay." She felt Petra's breath hitch once, just once, against her shoulder, and then the girl held on tight. Aldric found them in the upstairs sitting room 20 minutes later. He stopped in the doorway and looked at the 4 of them. Sylvie on the couch, Petra pressed against her side, both twins on the floor at her feet, with Jonah's transmitter project spread between them, because Sylvie had told them to do something with their hands and she'd meant it, and his face did something she had no word for. He looked at his children, at Sylvie, at the specific shape of them together in that room. He crossed to the couch and sat down beside Petra and put his hand on her hair very gently, and Petra, who maintained careful distance from almost everyone, who had told Sylvie on her 2nd week that she didn't hug, leaned into her father and closed her eyes. "I'm going to get you all something to eat," Sylvie said. And she stood up quietly because what was happening in that room between a father and his children was not hers to watch. He followed her into the hallway. "Sylvie." She stopped. It was the first time he'd used her name. He was standing with his arms at his sides and his face open in a way she had never seen it. Not unguarded exactly, because she didn't think he was capable of fully unguarded, but something close to it. Something that had stopped performing. "Thank you," he said. She looked at him. This man who had arranged for her to be brought here, who had been an abstraction, then a presence, then slowly, and against what she suspected were his intentions, something that felt dangerously like a person she was starting to know. "Don't thank me," she said. "They're good kids. Anyone would know," he said quietly. "They're not okay right now, and you stayed. That's not nothing." She held his gaze. The hallway between them was very quiet. "Are you okay?" she asked. He looked like the question surprised him, like it was a category of inquiry he hadn't expected and didn't entirely know how to process. "I will be," he said finally. She nodded, turned to go. Sylvie." His voice stopped her again. She waited. The arrangement, he paused, started again. "I want you to know that the debt is settled." It was settled after the first month. I should have told you then. She stood very still. You can leave, he said, whenever you want. There's no obligation. She thought about her apartment in the city, the digital piano she couldn't play anymore, the parking garage where she'd sat for 45 minutes with the engine off, too empty to move. She thought about Rafe saying you're weird and meaning it as a compliment. Jonah's face when the transmitter worked. Petra's hand in hers in the corridor. She thought about a man in a dark suit who looked at walls when he wanted to end conversations and had just said her name for the first time like it cost him something. I know, she said, and she went to the kitchen to make dinner for his family. February came with a thaw that made the ground soft and grey and full of the particular smell of things beginning again under mud. Rafe had been driving the old truck on the back property with his father on Saturday mornings for 3 weeks, and he came back from each one slightly taller, not physically, but in some other way, the way children grow when they've been seen doing something competent. Jonah had moved on from the transmitter to something he refused to fully explain, but which required a significant amount of copper wire and Sylvie's help accessing an online archive of 1960s engineering journals, which she provided without comment. Petra had started playing simple things, scales, folk songs, a melody she said she'd written herself that she played only when she thought no one was near enough to hear. Sylvie heard it through the door and stood in the hallway and listened and did not go in. There was a morning in the second week of February when Aldric came into the kitchen at 7, earlier than usual, and found Sylvie already there with coffee made, and Jonah's journal spread open on the table because she'd been looking something up before he was awake. He poured himself a cup and stood at the counter and looked out the window at the grey February grounds. She kept her eyes on the journal. My wife's name was Calla, he said. She looked up. He was still looking out the window. She died 2 years and 4 months ago, and for the first year I was very certain that the function of my life was to make sure whoever was responsible understood what they had chosen to do. He paused. I did that. I know, she said. After that I had 3 children who needed something I didn't know how to give them. He set down his coffee cup. I knew how to keep them safe. I didn't know how to be enough of whatever the other thing was. I kept trying to hire it. You can't hire that, she said. No. He looked at his hands. You know, Petra hasn't played since Calla died. Sylvie was quiet. Greta told me, he said, last week. He turned from the window and looked at her. I didn't know. I should have known. She's playing now, Sylvie said. Just so you know. Something crossed his face. Something she recognized because she'd seen it in her own mirror in the weeks after the accident. The specific reluctant relief of realizing something broken has maybe started, slowly, quietly, to be less broken. I owe you more than I can repay, he said. You don't owe me anything. I brought you here against. I chose to stay, she said. The debt was gone after a month. I chose to stay. He looked at her for a long moment. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the grounds were beginning to show something under the grey, a suggestion of green faint like a promise the earth hadn't quite committed to yet. Why? He asked. She thought about it honestly. Because your kids needed someone who wasn't going to leave, she said, and I needed something to be worth staying for. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and he kissed her, which she had not expected, and which was also, somehow, the least surprising thing that had happened since she drove to Harwick in the November rain. They got married on a Saturday in April, on the back grounds where Rafe drove the truck on weekend mornings, because Petra had said she wanted it outside, and when Petra wanted something she had recently discovered, Sas willing to say so, and neither Sylvie nor Aldric had any interest in telling her no. Jonah wore a tie that he'd knotted himself, incorrectly, and refused assistance with. Rafe wore his tie correctly and spent the ceremony standing with his arms crossed in the particular posture of an 8-year-old who is trying very hard not to look like he cares about something. Petra stood beside Sylvie. She had asked 2 weeks before, in the music room, with the piano uncovered and a piece of sheet music half annotated between them. She hadn't asked the way Sylvie had expected. No preamble, no performance of not caring. She had just looked up from the music and said, "Can I stand next to you? When you and Dad—" "Yes," Sylvie said before she'd finished the sentence. "You didn't let me finish. You were going to ask if you could stand next to me." Petra looked at the sheet music. "Yeah," she said, "that's what I was going to ask." The ceremonies was short. The April sun was soft, and the ground smelled like the beginning of things. Aldric held both her hands, the rapt left and the steady right, and looked at her the way she would later try and fail to describe, the way certain things resist language. Like a man who had spent 2 years building walls so heavy they'd started to become the architecture of his entire life, realizing slowly, and then all at once, that he'd left a door open, and someone had walked through it. When it was over, Rafe uncrossed his arms. He walked over to Sylvie with the careful dignity of a person making a decision they've thought about for a while. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what to call you." Sylvie waited. He looked at his shoes. "Looked up. Not Mum," he said. "Not yet. Maybe." He stopped. Tried again. "Is it okay if I figure it out as I go?" She crouched down, so they were eye level. "Take all the time you need," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." He looked at her for a moment with those dark, careful eyes that had been suspicious and were slowly becoming something else entirely. "Okay," he said. Then he reached out and took her bandaged hand, very gently, like something that mattered, and held it all the way back across the grounds to the house.